Hi, I'm Travis Kenny with Smith & Wesson. In this GUNSMARTS video, we partnered with the USCCA to talk about situational awareness. The U.S. Concealed Carry Association, an industry leader, providing resources to educate and empower American citizens. I'm joined today by our friends Beth and Richard to talk about situational awareness. You guys take it away.
All right, so like Travis said, we're here today to talk about situational awareness. And really, the first thing I want to say about that is it's about having that right mindset. You're paying attention to what's around you. You're physically, mentally in the moment, paying attention to your surroundings.
Right, and with that, you're consciously, actively, and purposefully making decisions and being aware of what people or what things might be in your immediate environment.
This applies whether you're armed or not. Just because I have my gun on me, that's not when I choose to pay attention. Whether I'm carrying a firearm, whatever weapon I'm carrying, whether I'm out in public or I'm at home, I still need to be paying attention because we don't know when danger is going to strike, right? We have to be prepared.
And part of that paying attention is using all of your senses to just be aware of what's happening, whether it's someone or something, and especially with your family or with your kids, you really have to be in that mindset all the time. And what I like to tell people, just as a really handy reminder, is that as you're out and about in your active everyday life, you need to choose to be the wrong person. And what I mean by that is you're basically doing things purposefully so you don't appear to be a victim or someone that a potential criminal might choose to take advantage of.
Absolutely. And, being that wrong victim, making yourself that hard target so that you can avoid the conflict in the first place, developing that mindset is really the first step in firearm ownership.
What's interesting about situational awareness is that it's actually important that we consider it in a lot of different contexts. So one thing for us to think about is how are we going to use good situational awareness as we're traveling from home to the range?
Absolutely. Again, you got to take that whole trip into consideration, right? So situational awareness doesn't just start when you get to the range. You got to be planning ahead. So you got to think about a couple different things. What type of range am I going to? Is it indoor or outdoor? So that's going to determine what I pack as well as what you're training for, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things you need to take into account.
Yeah, and when you're getting that vehicle ready, you got to make sure that you're packing everything carefully and smartly. You don't want to just leave something in the bed of your truck or have a gun case just laying on the back of the seat or something like that. You aren't going to necessarily know that exact route that you're going to take or how long, or maybe there's a detour or something distracts you, but you want to make sure that you're very deliberately putting stuff in a place where it's going to be safe and it's going to be hidden, but it's accessible to you and you alone.
Absolutely. And, when we talk about packing your range bag, you got to take that into mind too. What am I going to be encountering on the range?
Yeah.
So if it's that outdoor range you're going to, what's the weather like outside? Do I need my sunscreen? Do I need my bug spray? Am I going to an indoor range? That's going to change things too, right? Maybe you need to pack the earmuffs with the little foamies that go in your ears too, because that guy's going to show up and you'll be shooting right next to you and you don't want to wreck your hearing. So.
Right.
Taking all those things into account.
And this might be an interesting little tip, but for good situational awareness as you're going to the range, make sure that you have planned the trip and back, that you're not going to stop and visit friends or grab a bite to eat and take several hours at a restaurant or run all your errands. You don't want to leave all of that gear and anything else behind in that vehicle as you're doing something else. You don't want to be distracted from all the stuff that's in your car that you're going to need to make sure that you're on top of at all times.
Right. And when you're driving to the range as well, situational awareness is a good thing to practice while driving. It's especially important when you have firearms in the car. So it's one thing to get into an accident. It's another thing to get into an accident when you have guns in the car too. So we really want to be paying attention and applying good, safe driving. So that applies when we're on the road, and it even might affect what parking spot we pick.
Oh yeah, I love to pick a parking spot that is potentially, if it gets dark, it's going to have light somewhere nearby. Or if the weather decides that it's just going to open up and rain cats and dogs, I at least have something that makes me feel a little bit safer and allows me to see what I'm doing. That's super important whether you're at the range or anywhere else. So speaking of the range, there are some situational awareness kind of mindset items that we want to check those boxes when we arrive. So one of those things is after we've parked the vehicle and we're getting ready, make sure that you're aware of who is there. And, it depends, again, Richard mentioned, is it an indoor range? Is it an outdoor range? I like to make sure that I'm very conscious of the people who are there. Is it really busy?
Right.
Are there people that I know? Or if you're outdoors, is someone maybe potentially dressed inappropriately or maybe stands out a little bit, or someone that's, I don't know, acting a little bit odd or strange. I want to be aware of those things so that I feel more comfortable about where I'm going to go and shoot.
And that's a really good point. Most ranges, especially indoor ranges, are going to have some type of range safety officer there. But you don't want to just assume that because there's a range safety officer there, that, okay, I don't have to worry about my safety, because they might be busy. And we don't know who's on that range. There could be some people there who are practicing some very unsafe gun handling. And you don't want your world to exist inside your shooting bay. You have to be paying attention to what's going on the other bays aside, next to you. Because we've all seen that footage. Someone has an ND on the range and it doesn't go downrange, it goes sideways or uprange, and you need to be paying attention to that. So if you see someone who's being unsafe, you need to let that RSO know, and if they don't do anything, now it's, maybe you're done shooting for the day, because I'd rather be done shooting for the day than spend the rest of the day at the hospital, right?
Oh yeah. Well, and I already mentioned how important it is to make sure that you're in control of your gear when you're driving there, but you also need to be in control of your gear when you're at the range. You don't want to just be all discombobulated and just stuff everywhere. And you also want to make sure that you're going to treat your range bag kind of like that off-body carry. For those of us who do choose off-body carry, we know that there's certain parameters we must live by to make sure that we're safe with any kind of firearm. And that means you're not going to leave it behind and run off to the restroom and have unattended firearms or other gear that's left behind. Unless you're with a buddy, just be very cautious.
Yeah, watch it all. Because when I go to the range, I always imagine if I had to leave right now, I have to be able to grab all my stuff and go. So I'm not going to occupy the entire space. I'm not a goldfish where I grow to fill my enclosure. I'm going to make sure it's all within arm's reach. So I've got all my gear right here. So if I need to go right now, I can just pack it all up and leave. It's one of those quick safety things. How quickly can you leave a dangerous area?
Yes. And, again, depending on what kind of range that you're going to be shooting at and training at, you also need to keep in mind the different rules and regulations that might be specific to that area. And good situational awareness might help me learn, okay, if we're an outdoor range, where's the firing line? I want to make sure that I'm not going to go beyond that. An indoor range might be a little bit easier to figure out, but you want to make sure that you're using all the senses to just gain an understanding of everyone's body language and what the norms are, so that you are going to be safe and you're going to have a really good time training and doing all the things that you need to at the range that day.
Absolutely, especially if you're at an outdoor range, because indoor ranges, it's pretty self-explanatory. There's one area that's obviously downrange, but if you're going to a bigger outdoor range, there might be multiple shooting bays. You don't know when you might be walking across someone else's firing line. That's a great point, Beth. We have to pay attention to that.
So hopefully that helps you keep in mind as you're driving out to the range, packing your gear, getting everything together, as you're finding a parking space at the range, and as you're actually getting out and enjoying a day of shooting, don't forget situational awareness still applies.
All right, so when we get to the range, one of the first things we have to do is make sure we know where we can actually unpack all of our gear. And every range is different. They might have specific rules. They don't want you doing anything in the lobby. You have to wait till you're actually at your shooting bay. So one of the first things I do when I'm going to any new range is making sure, okay, what is this range's rules on where I actually unpack my stuff? And when I do that, I'm making sure I'm not taking up all the space I can. I want everything within typically like an arm's reach, right? Because if we have to get up and go quickly, I want to pack it all up right away and be able to go.
Well, and part of that is too, knowing your range bag and knowing all of your gear. If you happen to set it down and you open up and you're getting your gun box and you're about to grab your firearm and it's facing in an unsafe direction, that's a simple fix. Just turn that box or that bag around so that when you do access the firearm, it is pointed downrange in the safest direction possible while at the range. And that is situational awareness, because you're aware of yourself, your belongings, and you're paying attention to the people around you. With that, I also like to mention that range bag is like your off-body carry. We want to treat it the same way, with the same respect. For those of us that maybe carry a purse or backpack or some other off-body carry option, we know that there are certain parameters we have to live by. We're not just going to leave the bag behind and go off somewhere else and leave it unattended. We're going to make sure that it's with us at all times, that we're in control of it. And like you said, it's not just spread all around. It's ready for us to access for practice, and it's ready for us to access when we do need to leave.
So we're here today to talk about situational awareness while carrying a firearm concealed. And what I really want to rehash on is something we mentioned in a previous GUNSMARTS video, having the right mindset. Now, when you're carrying a firearm for self-defense, you've taken it upon yourself, you've taken that responsibility upon yourself to be your own protector. So you've recognized that threats do exist and I am responsible for myself and the people I care about the most. But here's the thing about carrying a firearm. Just because you have a firearm, it doesn't mean that you can do things that you wouldn't do without one. You don't want to be more aggressive. You want to be just as risk averse, if not more so, because that gun has some extra liability attached to it. So you need to be paying attention. It shouldn't make you more of an aggressive individual. All right, so getting that right mindset, you still want to avoid danger. Just because you have a gun doesn't mean you go looking for the fight.
Well, and you mentioned that we have to pay attention. And one really good way to do that is just use your senses. And I know that sounds really simple or maybe a little silly, but it's so important that we're just absorbing and observing what's happening in our environment, whether that's something in the environment that shouldn't be there, or whether that's a person that's maybe acting strange. We're going to observe them with our eyes. We're going to listen to see if something maybe sounds a little bit off. And we're also going to make sure that we're feeling that things are okay. And I don't just mean like haptics or proxemics, like how close we are to someone, or if someone, touches us or gets too close. I'm talking about that feeling that we get inside, that intuition, that kind of sixth sense that we've been blessed with, that we can utilize if something just doesn't feel right. Sometimes it feels like maybe a little butterfly in your stomach, or maybe the hair raising on the back of your neck, or even on your arms. It's hard to describe. It's different for everyone. Use that to your advantage. It's a survival positive, and we want to pay attention so that we can know if something is just not right.
And speaking of paying attention, it's important to mention that your ability to pay attention to your surroundings depends greatly on where you are and who you're with. So for example, before I was married, when I'd go to the grocery store, I could pay attention to everything happening in there. I knew what was happening in the frozen food aisle way in the back of the store. Now, married with two very small children, my bubble of situational awareness has shrunk drastically. So I'm paying attention to everything that's within one arm's reach, because my kids are pulling things off the shelves, they're arguing with each other. I just don't have that same amount of resources to apply to everything else around me. So you need to keep that in mind when you're out in town. Who's with me, and how much can I actually be paying attention to my surroundings?
Well, that's part of the whole situational awareness mindset too, is that you've made a conscious decision that even though you possibly have these little distractions with you, you're going to continue to, look around and be observant and, notice what's happening. And speaking of noticing what's happening, you can't just be so hyper-focused on self and feeling or family that you're missing out on what others are doing in your environment. You need to see maybe they're wearing something that's just inappropriate for a hot summer day, or maybe they're getting really fidgety. There are different cues and clues that we can look for with their body language, or even with their expressions, that something is not right, or they're about to attack, or they're about to consider doing something, nefarious. So we want to certainly look for hands, because obviously that's where a lot of that damage could be caused, whether they have a weapon or not, or they're just gonna, hit somebody. And we also want to make sure, what are they doing? Are they reaching for something? Are they fidgeting or shuffling? Keep all of those different cues and clues in mind, because if you see something that doesn't make you feel right, especially with your family, that might be your perfect option to leave.
Absolutely. And Beth, you give them a bunch of stuff to pay attention to, and those pre-attack indicators are vital. But like I said, you can't pay attention to everything. And the good news is, when we're practicing situational awareness, use those color codes that we talk about. We have white, yellow, orange, and red. Stay in that condition yellow. And that's that basic awareness of what's happening around you. I like to refer to it as establishing that baseline. So when you walk into like a grocery store or the coffee shop, typically how things go in that area. You know how people act, so you have a good baseline established, and you're just waiting for little blips to pop up on the radar, like that one person who shows up who doesn't really fit in. So you don't have to pay attention to everything.
Yeah.
You just have to pay attention to those anomalies.
Yes, it's not like we're walking around paranoid.
Right.
We're just being prepared, and we're being very deliberate and mindful about everything. With that, it's important that we also are thinking and planning ahead. And sometimes that seems like such an obvious, but it can be easily overlooked. Sometimes that planning ahead or that thinking ahead might be, where am I going to be going, and who should be there? What is that baseline going to look like, or what should it look like? What are the norms? Who's going to be with me? We want to make sure we're conscious of those things. And with that, have a plan of action. And as we teach with the USCCA, we've got lots of resources that help just pound this into our brains so we never forget. But there are certain steps we want to take in a certain order. And that is to avoid, escape, de-escalate, and defend. And basically what that means is, it's best if you can avoid the situation altogether. That is your guarantee that you're not going to be hurt. The next thing would be escape. Maybe there's a route that you can take that's going to lead you out of a building or bring you to a place that's a little bit less dangerous, depending on what's happening. Maybe there's an opportunity to de-escalate a situation if you can't avoid or escape it. And finally, as that last resort, of course, self-defense.
And USCCA has a fantastic course on situational awareness that you can take online, and it really dives into those different components that Beth here was just talking about. So definitely worth checking out. There's a lot of great resources there for anything you need to learn education or training wise.
So situational awareness is just as important in situations where maybe you can't carry a firearm with you. And we do want to address that and talk about that. In fact, what would be some reasons why you couldn't carry? Obviously, there might be some local, federal, even state laws that are in place that would keep you from carrying any kind of firearm in that specific location. But sometimes it might just be your lifestyle or your workplace that might have different rules in place where they frown upon having a firearm with you. So how does that look?
Just because you might even live in a constitutional carry state, but that does not mean you can carry your firearm everywhere. And there are certain places where it is illegal to carry a gun. But it's more than just what does the law say? Maybe you're making a personal choice not to carry in every situation. Again, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. So you got to pay attention to where you're going. Like we said, you got to plan ahead for where you're going. If you're looking to have a good night out with friends you haven't seen in a while, you're going to be going to a couple bars, maybe that's not the best time to be carrying a firearm if you know you're going to be drinking alcohol, right? Or maybe you are the designated driver. Maybe that makes you also the designated defender of that group because now you're the one who's carrying the gun, drinking a Coca-Cola instead of actually drinking with your buddies. So it really all depends on where you're going. You might make that personal choice.
And with that, we have to kind of understand, what does situational awareness look like, or how does it differ under those kinds of circumstances? Ultimately, the answer is
Doesn't change at all.
it doesn't. It should be exactly the same. In fact, you're not going to go stupid places with your gun, so you don't want to go stupid places without it. You want to make those wise decisions. You want to think ahead, be prepared, and just avoid any of those possibilities that you are maybe uncomfortable or uncertain about before you ever get involved with them.
You want to think of your firearm as just another tool that you have with you. Something else you take into your equation. The game plan shouldn't change. You want to avoid danger at all costs. So the gun is just something that helps you with that. It's not the determining factor.
Right.
So don't go to dangerous places with or without a firearm. Just don't go to dangerous places.
Right.
So whether or not you have a gun on you should not affect your situational awareness.
Of course, if you can't have a firearm, or if you choose not to have one, maybe it's that special event and you've got that certain dress on, it just doesn't work. Yeah, I know you go through that a lot, Richard.
Right? Little black dress.
Yeah, and that's hard to carry a gun sometimes. So what are your options? And we do want to consider that as well. I know one of my personal favorite options, I love to carry a tactical flashlight with me at all times. And I know that's not really something I'm going to use as a weapon per se, but I think that it does have a lot of different capabilities for self-defense and situational awareness. I have one I can wear on a lanyard, and very quickly I can light up the area around me, or hands-free, allow it to continue to light my path, especially with those kiddos around where maybe I'm corralling them.
I carry a flashlight with me every day. It is the most useful item I carry with me everywhere. My kids, when I'm putting them into bed at night, one of their favorite games is hide the pacifier. So the lights are out in the room, put them in the crib, and it goes off into nowhere, and that flashlight helps me find it right away. But yes, it's good for more than just emergency situations, but it can be used defensively as well. Nothing says I'm prepared better than having a flashlight in the dark.
Yes, especially even if it's just a quick, just a flash in someone's face. They don't even have to be someone that is causing you harm or intending to, but it might give you that little bit of an advantage. That's, again, part of good situational awareness, making sure that no one sneaks up on you or takes you unawares. Other than a flashlight, though, there are some other options. I know maybe a knife, maybe OC spray.
Yeah, knives, pepper spray. Some states allow you to carry batons, things like that. But you do need to pay attention to what the laws are in your state or any state you're traveling to. For example, I travel a lot for work, and I know that what I can carry here in my home state is very different from what I might be able to carry somewhere else. So they might let me carry a firearm in this state that I'm traveling to, but now all of a sudden they have an issue with me wanting to carry a certain type of knife or a certain type of spray. It all depends on the state you're going to. So one thing you want to keep in mind is all this reciprocity. That can be really difficult to keep track of. The USCCA has a fantastic resource through the reciprocity map. So if you haven't been on there, you can check it out. You can plug in your state's concealed carry permit or any other states you hold, because I know you hold multiple state permits, right?
Yeah.
So you could do your own little configuration unique just to you, and it shows you all the states you can carry in, and then it mentions state by state their laws. So it's a fantastic resource you should check out. So in closing, when we're talking about situational awareness, the one thing we really want to impart on you is that this doesn't happen overnight. This is a mindset shift, and it takes some discipline to get used to it. But if you put in the time and you put in the practice, it becomes second nature. Being situationally aware is not being paranoid. They're not the same thing. It just means you're paying attention to what's going on. You're thinking ahead before you go anywhere or make any decisions. So if you're on edge, if you're constantly paranoid or stressing out, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
You just need to relax, take your time, and eventually it just comes naturally.
And you know what? Speaking of training and learned skills, if you want to learn more about concealed carry, please check out all the series from GUNSMARTS. And don't forget to go to the USCCA website for more information by going to usconcealedcarry.com.